Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just apologize for those of us who came in late. We just barely got out of the meeting and people needed to grab food.
So I do have a speech.
Yes, you can do that. You're welcome to this. Thank you all for coming. I feel like this committee needs like an extra sense of love and gratitude because you guys have worked so hard, staff and everybody who takes part in this committee. So thank you so much for all the extra time. Let's just quickly go around the table. Actually, let's go around the room first, and then we'll go around the table, and maybe board member Cummins will be here too. So why don't we start with you?
Brandon Jacobson, I'm CTE IT Education right now.
Thank you.
Travis Cook, State Board of Ed, CTE.
Sarah Jones with UEA.
Joylyn Lincoln with the Utah Association of Charter Schools.
Jennifer Rosen, Director of Teaching and Learning here.
Jody Parker, Health and PE Specialist.
Now wait a minute. There's a name change.
You're going to need the chair's permission to say that.
I'm sorry.
Okay, yes, you may.
Can you tell us when Kaufman became Parker?
So legally, Kaufman became Parker a year ago. But in this agency, I waited till health standards because there was so much going on that I didn't want there to be more confusion.
Scandal. Specialist changes.
I kept my email and the phone under my name before I was married as Kaufman. So I was married a year ago, and so yeah.
So that is true dedication to a job. My goodness.
The staff is very dedicated.
It was actually it's kind of stressful to change your name because your email, then you lose so many files. So I'm really glad that I waited because I lost a lot of stuff.
Oh man.
So yes, that is the reason for the name change.
Oh my goodness.
There you go.
Congratulations.
You're welcome.
Brian Olmsted, Coordinator, Student Support.
And my cousin.
Yes.
Is it a first cousin?
No.
Like 9. Close enough.
We're all my cousins.
My grandma was an Olmsted.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Corby Easton, Student Support.
Okay. I think we did miss anyone. I'm Jenny Kravitz. I represent District 4, which is Davis and Weber counties.
Linda Hanson, District 3, which is Chihuahua County, Juab County, most of West Valley, Magna, and some of Salt Lake City, just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Janet Cannon, Granite District and Murray District.
Scott Hansen, District 2, Ogden, and then I bump into Jenny and Weber.
Yeah.
Jeff Van Holten, Policy Advisor for the Board.
Norley Green, Board Secretary.
Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent at USP.
And then board member Cummins should be joining us shortly. So let's go ahead and start with 6.1, which is R277704, Financial and Economic Literacy, Integration into Core Curriculum and Financial and Economic Literacy Student Passport. So it looks like we need to make sure this adapts to the recent legislative changes, House Bill 286. And I'll let Jeff Van Holten tell us about it.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Rule 704, as Chair Gravitt has mentioned, is just to comply with House Bill 286. So what you're going to see is just some simple deletions throughout to get rid of the student passport requirement that we deleted in House Bill 286. We also
Can you tell us what the student passport was?
Chair, if I may,
Yes,
invite Travis Cook up to answer that question more adequately than I can.
Sure. So when this legislation initiated back in 2003, the objective of the passport was to have a touch point K through 12 for financial literacy in Utah. We still have that, fortunately. The dilemma with the passport in code, and as it was established, is the obligation of the board to track that reality for all of those students across all of those grades. Think of it as an entirely separate SIS or credentialing option for students. And so, recognizing that the work's already been done and will continue, that was why they decided to rescind the obligation of the tracking in the passport as it stands currently.
Okay.
Great. So really all you're going to find is deleting the sections in the rule related to the passport. really it. That concludes the
Do committee members have questions? Yeah.
Just a couple. So I noticed we went through and it looks like we checked the code sections, so everything's been updated there. And always when, I don't know when the last time this rule was looked at before we made this change. Do you know how long it's been since it was updated?
Every 5 years.
We made this, we amended this per the audit that came out, I believe, November, October of 2018, so right before you started.
So it
Yeah, I was
hasn't been
gonna
that long.
say it's been-
We routinely do the memory project, even if they don't need it.
Just think it's important when we do
Good.
update it, not just to look at the place that changed in the code, but also to see what else needs to be updated. It looks like we went through, we took out some referrals to 277, 520, and we
Yeah.
put in definitions. Why did we do that?
So we took those out because those 520 and 522 are two rules that are set to sunset. The Law and Licensing Committee has been redoing all of the licensing rules and actually switching them over into the 300 section of our 277. And so because those rules are sunsetting and we actually are not sure what the new numbers will be, if there will be new numbers, that those definitions will be moved to, we thought for now it'd be safer just to put them in.
Awesome. Good
Yeah,
work.
smart.
Way to look ahead. Okay.
Can I, if I may, Chair? Just when you refer to the audit, are you referring to the audit that came out of Senator or Auditor Dougal's office?
Yep.
Okay, because he was complaining to me about that the other day, how we haven't really jumped on it. Or the fixings or
Sure.
the testing and all that stuff.
The tests have been reviewed. We did a pilot in Alpine throughout their district.
Okay.
So we're in good shape.
Okay, good.
So
And
the vast majority of the things he asked for formally
Yeah.
have been addressed.
okay, and I think I remember asking you a couple months ago, maybe it was February, about adding blockchain and all of that stuff to it. Has that component been added?
So the changes that were made here and that are proposed here are all statutory changes. And so
Okay.
this is one of those unique statutes that actually gets very prescriptive about the content of the course. And cryptocurrency was not something that the legislature decided to add in any way, shape, or form. And so currently that's not reflected here.
Can you go and add them beyond that? Because I think by the time we add it next, 5 years from now, we're going to be way behind the curve. And I thought, remind me, correct me if I'm wrong, that Jonathan Johnson was supposed to come and talk to you
Yes.
about that and
Yes.
and about cryptocurrency and all of that stuff. So I just don't want the students to be behind the 8 ball when the rest of the students in the nation are already learning about it, right? So might as well jump the gun, no matter if the legislature's telling us to do it or not, that we just be proactive about it.
Absolutely. That's a note I can take back. That task force will meet one more time this fiscal year on June 20th. And I'd be happy to bring that up and see if we can't find a place to sit that in this strand.
I think it's critical, and especially as we're volatile right now, I think it's super critical. So
Yeah. The Federal Reserve has been kind enough to do some PD this year, and they've made a commitment annually to do PD. And they brought someone out from DC to address cryptocurrency directly with
so they are thinking about
Well, they're
it.
thinking about it. It scares them to death. But
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure,
They are
but
thinking about it, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
From a regulation standpoint, it's a whole new lift for them.
right,
Yeah.
which I'm okay if they're challenged, but
Absolutely. Absolutely.
okay.
Good point.
Any other questions? If not, we can entertain a motion.
I had a question.
Oh, Janet.
And I wrote myself notes, and now I can't. Now my notes don't make any sense.
You can read out
Last
they are.
night at 2 in the morning.
I'll just call
I
them
actually did this on
cryptocurrency.
Wednesday when I had no excuse for having nothing make sense. Just a question about 529 programs. And I have a note here saying that somewhere I saw that the parents receive that information during kindergarten enrollment.
They do. Yeah.
Do they receive it at any other time? Is it just once? Because
Yeah, the obligation in statute is just once at that kindergarten enrollment, a collaboration between our agency and the My 529 folks. But then it's addressed obviously in the course, and it's
Okay.
not addressed in social studies, economic standards per se. So you're basically talking 2 times over the course of a student's
I will
experience.
tell you though, every PTA activity that we've gone to,
See
we go
how that
to,
lines up.
we have those brochures out there and
That's
it's
what I
there
know.
so people
That's
can
what I
take
know.
them. So,
Yeah, Jen, you bring up My 529. It's unique in Utah. There are numbers of states that use our My our state's My 529.
Doesn't the Supreme Court Justice have accounts for his
Yeah.
grandkids
Yes.
Yeah,
in Utah?
it's a great program.
When I did that economic study with the
information. How did you get that?
yeah.
Lynn Ward?
When I did the economic study with the University of Utah a couple years back, one of the students that had zero debt through 4 years of economics was a student of a Wells Fargo banker. And his father had initiated a My 529 when he was born, and he was able to use that My 529 to leverage all of his costs. And there was another student in that same cohort of 6 students that had a $130,000 debt obligation out of college at the University of Utah 2017 for an economics degree.
That's crazy.
Board Member Cummins.
Thank you. So I'm now catching up. My head's spinning. Are you, when you talk about curriculum, are you also bringing in like the Tuttle twins?
I'm not familiar with the Tuttle twins.
What? Okay, you need to get the Tuttle twins.
Tuttle twins.
Yes, the Tuttle twins. It talks about economics. It talks about the pencil and everything that it goes on to create the pencil and the manufacturing behind it and employing all of that. It talks about the law. It's more of a Austrian economics perspective, and I think it's an essential part of, especially elementary kids, to learn about just the process of economics on their level. It really encourages them. So I would encourage the Tuttle twins. Also, in high school, do you talk about Austrian economics? Do you go that route? Because, I mean, when I talk about praxeology, people go, huh? You know, and when we talk about the free market, I mean, if the governor wants to talk about the free market, you've really got to bring in Austrian economics, right, to counter the Keynesian economic aspect. And so, is that in there?
So right now, the strands and standards will read the update from the statute, the bill, and it will discuss 57 through 60 a command system such as socialism or communism, a market system such as capitalism, and a mixed system, and historic and current examples of the effects of each economic system on economic growth. So outside of that very generic offering, teachers would be able to work within that to do some of the work that you're maybe suggesting. Yeah.
And maybe something at a curriculum level.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Maybe just suggestions, put it on the resources, and but I would seriously look at the Tuttle twins and really dive into that and push that at the elementary level. I think they're fantastic.
Okay.
So
Good discussion. Okay, looking for a motion. Board Member Hanson.
I move that we approve our 277-704 as amended and send it to the board on first reading and send it to the board to approve on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the committee is to approve the amendments of R277-704, draft 1 on first reading. Is there any discussion to the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Okay, 6.2. This is R277-474, and this again updates the rule in accordance with recent legislative changes. Sounds familiar. And again, Jeffrey Van Holten will talk to us about this.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. We've got R277-474, the school instruction and sex education, and very few changes in here, just to reference the section of code that has changed from House Bill 71 that now lists what may be covered by instructors regarding contraceptives. And there is also one additional deletion I did want to highlight in on the first page. So in lines 30 through 32, there's a whole list of things in that definition, but that is a list copied and pasted from statute. So we took that out so that it's just the definition is referring to the statute. We just wanted to read that reference there rather than making the whole list.
And this adds what they can and what they can't say to teachers. Like, I think that's the important thing to.
Correct. So on line 67, you'll see what may be provided in instruction now and refers to the code on what it is.
Any questions from committee members? Board Member Ken?
I have 2 questions. So I was reading the code that went along with it, and it said in the code, because school employees and volunteers serve as examples to their students, school employees or volunteers acting in their official capacities may not support or encourage criminal conduct by students, teachers, or volunteers. What kind of criminal conduct are they referring to?
You want to invite?
The board or a local school board may not allow training of school employees or volunteers that supports or encourages criminal conduct.
I will actually.
Hey, let's invite Jody Kaufman Parker to the table. Besides, we've missed her. I mean, 7 hours wasn't enough time with you.
Oh, I took a whole month away from you.
know.
I didn't come at all in May.
Drought. Jody Drought.
So, Jody Parker, Health Education Specialist, ESP. So, I don't know specifically, like if there's, I didn't write this code, but when I do the trainings and when the training that we provide online, because every health education teacher in the state of Utah must take a law and policy course. Their first year teaching every 3 years after. They also must, if they teach FACS, Family Consumer Science, they have to take the course. Most biology teachers in their LEA are required to take it. Some school districts require every teacher, no matter what you teach, to take this course. But in code, it's just any teacher that teaches any of the subjects that are on that cross line, right? So when we teach it, we talk about the things that can't be taught, which is intricacies of intercourse, premarital or extramarital sexual activity, and encouragement of contraceptive methods or devices. So those are the things that we can't, and then also anything that would be unlawful for a student, that is when they are under the age of consent. So we wouldn't be giving any instruction of that. Anything about harassment, abuse, forced sexual behavior, all of that would be illegal activity. So those are the things that I specifically talk about in my training, if that's helpful to your answer.
That is very helpful. Thank you.
But that is a pretty blanket statement in the code.
Yeah.
So I think it could cover a lot of things, but that's where I focus because that's within this subject matter. So that's that's what I focus on.
Thank you. Okay.
Did you have another question?
Yes. Question 2. So this is amendment, and the amendment is to provide an appeals process for adopted curriculum materials. So I'm trying to envision what an appeal for curriculum would look like. How do you appeal the curriculum you used? I mean, would
you like me to answer that?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Chair?
Yes.
Okay. So sometimes material, so there's a review for all material that is for instruction. So that's videos, guest speakers, and then textbooks, PowerPoints, worksheets, all of that has to go through a review committee. And every LEA title is a little different, but most commonly it's called the Sex Education Review Materials Review Committee. That's what most of them call it. If something is not approved, but a teacher really thinks it should be, they can then appeal. Now added into the statute, they could appeal to that committee and give more justification to why it ought to be. Or maybe they approve something and someone says, wait a minute, I don't think that should be approved. Did you watch the whole thing? Did you see this part here? Because that's not appropriate. That would again then open that door up to allow for an appeal to remove it from the list. So it would go both directions.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks. That's helpful.
Another question?
Is this in any way to cover after-school programs? No. So those programs are still, because I'm concerned that Planned Parenthood has their own programs after school, and that they do bring in and circumvent the law that's on statute. So the law doesn't cover them at all.
Well, it wouldn't be on school. Go ahead. Yeah, it's school sponsored. It has to abide by the law, but that wouldn't be school sponsored.
But not after school, right? I heard there was
There's several after school programs that are community based.
Yeah.
So Planned Parenthood has some. Department of Health has some.
Yeah.
There's I never get their name, the words of their, but it is an abstinence only program.
Yep.
It's also after school. There's several.
Yes.
And all of those are community based, and this code doesn't
cover any of
cover
that.
them at all.
Kind of outside board purview.
Right.
Okay.
Review is
Okay. I just didn't know if that just covered over education or if it expanded. So, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Or if we're ready for a motion, we can do that. There's no more questions?
Motion.
Okay.
I move that we approve R277474 draft 1 on first reading and send to the board for second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the committee is to approve the amendments for R277474 draft 1 on first reading and forward recommendations for approval to the board on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion?
I have just one question there. So now we have this new appeals process. I don't see anything in here where we're trying to check, and I don't know that we have to see if that's been put in place or see if it's been exercised or at all. It just says they have to have an appeals process. We do get copies of any materials that they use that are outside of the normal state approved. What do we think about that? We're going to put this in the rule, it's going to go out. We're getting some stuff back from them. Do we want to get a copy of their appeals process with the materials that come back to check? Or we don't have to, but it could save us the same thing that we had on school
We
fees.
have, it's called, sorry,
Oh,
Chair.
go ahead. And I just wanted to
I'm out
say,
of order.
after you are always on order, after you speak, I'm wondering if Linda Hanks would be willing to come up and talk about that from a local perspective. Okay, go ahead.
So I send out an assurance form every year. And I send it in September, it's due in May of every single year. And that form, so the first part of the form says that each teacher's been trained. The next part says who the members of their committee, not their names, but it lists that there's 5 parents and 3 teachers and 1 administrator, and that's the next. And then you go, the next page is then where they list out their material that is not USDE approved. If they use anything that's not on our list, they list it out for me. The last section, which happened in 2018 legislative session, trying to say section and session together, and that was a weird word, is that they do the data requirements. So we now require, as of last year, that they review data when they're approving the material. So we could very easily add one more little checkbox to the bottom of it, that your LEA has an appeals process. If that's something that the board would
I
like,
think that would make sense.
if the board would like, that is a very simple thing for me to add. I add one more little box, and they check it and say that our LEA has an appeals process for approved material.
And it would be clear and it would be organized.
Yeah.
That'd be simple.
Yes.
If the board would like.
The board would like.
One of the things that's been in conversation among other committees outside of standards and assessment is the fact that we have assurance documents.
Yeah.
And right now, with the assurance documents, not many of them have something that includes a line of evidence. So that's something as a board that you might want to consider in a further conversation, where we have, it could be a link to or an upload of. And so right now in assurance, when we've heard from some of our superintendents and some of our business administrators, that the checklist sometimes makes them feel not as responsible, and so they're
they
actually
just check it
owning
off.
Yes, and so and that's in the attitude of having good relationships and accountability. They're saying, that line of evidence might make us be able to go one more step to say, do we really have it? And then asking someone for that to be able to say, either a something to upload or a link to go to it. So that's something as a board you might want to discuss further in moving out a lot of the assurances.
And I appreciate that, Patty. That's actually what I was going to ask. Because I think just getting the checkbox is a CYA for the board.
Yeah.
Right? It says, we asked, they said, okay. Getting some kind of evidence does 2 things. At first, it makes them do something, besides somebody just check the box when they're in a hurry. And second, if we have that, we can compare and say, here's what the process looks like in this district, here's what it looks like
And there's
here.
documentation.
Can I be another viewpoint?
Sure.
I don't know that we need to micromanage the districts.
Yeah,
If we put
that's what I
everything that we want them to do on a list and make them check it off or do whatever, it's just too much. I trust them. I trust them to do
Yeah,
that.
I would love your take on that, and also just in response to Board Member Hansen's.
Bridget may have something to say.
Oh,
too.
okay.
So, but hey, Linda Hanks, Utah School Boards Association, so representing local boards. So, Once we have the rule comes to the boards, and then we have to develop our own policy, right?
Yeah.
So we have it in policy to have the appeals committee. I mean, there's this process in place, and then there's an education that takes place as to when you go to complain, because the complaints will come to the district office, then they walk them through that appeals process. I don't know if that looks exactly the same in all districts, but I would assume that it is in place in all districts because it's in rule. So once it's in rule, it becomes, we put it into our own local policy, and it's there.
If you've been to those policies, they're
Did
really
you want to add
fun.
anything?
I concur.
I was going to make fun of the table to say I concur.
So I don't know that we really need it, because they get the rule, and then they have their big board meeting. If you've never been to the big board meeting where they do policy, it's really fun. And so you go, and they're working through the rule and putting all of that in their own policy. So I don't know that we need that.
If I
Thank you,
That's
Linda.
just my opinion.
I'd speak again to Mike. Go ahead.
Jennifer Thronston, would you like to come to the table?
I would probably another way to do it would be for us to engage in random sampling of audits each year, where she would pick 10, like a certain percentage of the LEAs, and ask them to submit, rather than asking everyone to do the lift. But that holds some accountability. And then if we do, let's say 10 to 15 LEAs, and 10 to 15 don't have it, then it's a different lift. And if we get it from everybody or not, so it just we've found in our practice last year with literacy, they were supposed to have a particular thing done.
Yeah.
We checked. We had like 40 who didn't have it done on time. We checked again middle of the year when they had to do the same task again, and everybody had it done. So us just checking seemed to change people's understanding of we will check, but we don't need to check on 100% of you because we do have a level of trust.
Right.
But we at least can do
That
some
might be a
random
nice
auditing.
balance.
It might be a middle
That's-
point
that's
for you.
Patty?
Thank you. Add a layer of complexity to the conversations. Of course, I know. That's what I love to do. Just to be able to represent what's the discussion occurring in other committees, which is that, and Courtney sitting here, I know that you want to speak to. So hopefully I'll kind of speak, and if I'm missing anything, let me. So when it comes to having model policies at the State Board of Education, it kind of is accomplishing two things at one time. If we have someone be able to upload just a link to say, here's what our policy is, then we can have a collection of what those model policies are out there from other LEAs. And instead of us having to say, do you have yours, do you have yours, we can say, here's the links. If you'd like to then use these as your reference to go back, then you have that as well. So it accomplishes two things at one time. So that's just some of the discussion outside of what's happening in standards. I just wanted to bring that to
I did think about that. It'd be nice to have a collection of model policies for local districts to look at, especially if they want guidance. Any other, Corby, is that okay, or do you need to?
And it's not specific to this, it's
Right.
to the outside, so I apologize for that.
Do you want to come to the table? Of course you do. We're going to try to get everybody.
Yeah.
Hello, Corbin Houston from Student Support. Yes, I totally concur with Ms. Norman stated, because one of my responsibilities is overseeing bullying prevention, and it's nice to know that, especially with the recent updates of the last two legislation sessions ago, that they are in compliance. And when we receive a complaint, it's nice to have the LEA policy on task as I look through to ensure that they follow their policy. And also with so much administrative turnover, LEA leadership turnover, it'd be nice to have something that they know they need to be doing, because their job is always sometimes turnover in certain LEAs.
I can see there's an efficiency to that too, because you can go right to the.
And so again, I'm not advocating before, just bringing information to you.
It's good information.
And I would advocate for, I just think that's the way to go. I think a link is not so onerous, just to stick it on there once, and every year when they do their assurances, they have the same paper they already turned in before. It's got the link in it.
So it's like
And
there's
we
a check
have
box with the place for it.
Then we have it. Also, I think to school fees, I mean, the rule went out, we had to change, and things didn't get done. And then afterwards, we had this huge mess. Yeah, but if they would have had to check the box and say, yes, we put in place those policies, then that would have would have happened, I think.
Yeah.
Or at least come to the surface.
Well, we're still working through that rule, and that's part of the problem. Is because finance will see it at least twice more, they said, before it's done. And so that's why a lot of them can't put their policies in place yet because the rules
I'm talking
still
about years
changing.
ago initially when the injunction came about.
95.
That's should have gone through and been put into, and then some assurances come to the board.
Do we have any more discussion to this motion?
This isn't a motion to change this rule. It's really to change our practice here, and I don't know how do we do that? I mean, I would like to.
So, if we approve this motion, can we direct
staff
Can I ask
to?
a question? So let me think through this with everybody so that I can think through this. So someone brings something, a teacher brings something to an LEA, to a school and says, I want to use this for sex. And the committee says, and they still want the committee to do it, right? How's the teacher going to know there's appeals process?
I know.
The teacher's going to go to the LEA and say, well, I still think that this should be approved. And the LEA is going to be the one that's going to say, there's an appeals process.
Will they be educated on that? Jody, can you help us out?
It has been added to the law and policy training.
Okay, that's what I'm wondering.
That every teacher
has to take.
So the teacher will know.
That
And so the teacher will come and say to the LEA and say, then I want to appeal. And they'll look at their policy and go, well, they can appeal. So
I can see how it could be tricky, you can appeal, but how do I do that? What's the process?
It doesn't, but it doesn't say in there what the process is.
Do you want to come to the table and give some insight? Will you introduce
Yes, I
yourself?
will. My name is Marisa Manziona. I'm here for USDA. I am a local school board member in Tooele. We had that before the rules changed in our policy, that there was an appeals process and the way to appeal the process. And
so your teachers knew?
The teachers would know. Okay. And if they're denied, that's actually given to them.
Okay.
So that they have the process.
Okay, thank you. Good questions.
So I guess my question is it necessary to be in the rules to be part of the process?
I don't
or
think,
does it need, or does it
this rule is just to say that it's okay to update it so that it's in compliance with the law, with statute.
Mm-hmm. But then I think as a committee,
it can direct
that after we deal with the rules, Scott could make a motion
yes
about giving directions.
Right, that's what I was
staff.
thinking. So let's deal with the motion on the table. The motion is to approve the amendments of R27747 for draft 1 on first reading and forward recommendations to the full board. All those in favor of that say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously.
And a related motion to direct staff to include an assurance for the required appeals process in the annual documents that go out, and to have them include a link to their actual policy or process. That would be my motion.
Okay, let me make sure I got that right. So the motion before the committee is to direct staff to create an assurance policy for
to add the appeals process to the assurance
for request of an appeals process in annual documents that go out to LEAs, with including a link, as a place for a link to be added. Did I get that?
So that's the evidence. So an assurance with evidence.
Let me see. Norley, did you get that? Or do we need to repeat it?
Maybe we need you to tell us what the words are for those different documents.
Yeah, so as I understand it, the motion would be to direct staff to include in the annual assurance document for the health standards, because there is also a separate general annual
It's Sex Education Law and Policy Assurances, the name of the document.
Okay.
So to include in that document the Sex
Education Law and Policy Assurances is the name of the
When
document.
we point to you, you're going to say that.
Okay.
So to include in that document a checkbox for an appeals process existing and a link to where we can find the appeals process delineated.
Okay, say that one more time.
I have it very simple.
You don't want
Jody.
I'm wondering, do we even know they have a committee? Maybe we need to put that on the assurance.
It is.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, that's the second part of the.
Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Speaking out of turn today.
That's okay.
It's not my hand, Jeff.
So on the assurances, it says you have a committee.
Yes. And they have to tell me how many of each person is on that committee. So, for example, if there's an administrator, they tell me there's 2. If there's local board members, they tell me 1. Their committee has to have at least equal number of parents as school staff.
Good.
So there's a line for parents, and if there's 5 staff, they have to have 5 or more parents. So on that, there's a box in the middle, and I know I'm like drawing with my hands.
I like
that makes so much sense to
It
you.
does. I can see it.
But there's a box in the middle of that form, and they have to tell me how many of each type of
That's
person
awesome.
is on that committee, and they have to tell me the date of their last committee meeting.
Oh,
Okay.
And that's already on the form.
okay, Jody, you're going to give us
Yes.
a motion. We'll see which
So-
one. It's like multiple choice motions.
Yeah. Okay, so, and I just wrote this for my note, by the way, so because I have to add it to the form potentially. That we add to the annual sex education law and policy assurance form a place for an LEA to check that they have an appeals process and add a link to their policy.
Okay, one more time, please.
On the annual sex education law and policy assurance form, an LEA, add a place for LEAs to check that they have an appeals process and add a link to their policy.
Appeals process for curriculum.
For
For adopted materials.
Appeal, yes, I guess. Appeals process for
Material
we should
adoption
use the same
curriculum.
language
They
that's in
call
here.
it adopted materials.
For adopted materials.
Place
Okay.
for
So appeals process for adopted materials.
a link. Okay, a place for a line of evidence link or a.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, including evidence.
Okay, for a link including evidence. Okay, let's see. Okay, so the motion before the committee is to direct staff to add to the annual
Sex education law and policy assurance form.
a place for an LEA to check an appeals process for material adoption and a place for a link that would include evidence.
Sure.
Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Norley, did you get that? Or I can see that. Okay. Oh, you're brilliant. Okay.
Great.
Oh, everybody. I love you all. Okay. Thanks, Jody.
And you
Okay.
put it to me because you didn't want to have to say.
What?
Thank you.
Okay, so we're on 6.3. This is R277404, and I'm seeing a pattern here. This rule needs to be updated and be in compliance with House Bill 118. So we have.
Kind of rewrote it, right?
Well, we had to take out some things, add some things.
There's a lot of taking out.
But I am confused on the guiding document. I'll ask that question after. But Jeff, go ahead and talk to us about this.
And we're on 404.
Yes, 404.
Okay. So this is in response to House Bill 118,
Yes.
which, for those who don't recall, is the bill that allows for a teacher to offer an academic reward for a student's performance on a statewide assessment.
No, there's one.
So there is not too many edits on this one. On lines 59 to 62, we deleted redundant language that's already in code. But I did want to put Board Member Scott Hansen, I want to point out line 101. We corrected the URL.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To make sure that was correct. And then we also deleted on lines 152 down to 159. That was to make sure this rule is in parallel with 707, which discusses not allowing prerequisites for AP and IB.
Right.
And we wanted to make sure that this didn't become redundant or somehow contradict that. So we took those lines out as well. And that is, I believe, all of the edits. We did delete the section that prohibited or that allowed, so on line 165, that allows a parent to request that a statewide assessment performance be allowed in a student's grade, because that is now allowed by code.
Yeah, you don't have to opt in anymore.
Correct. You will not actually find anywhere in this rule where it expressly states that fact because it is in code, but we just wanted to make conformity changes.
Well, and that's the question I have. So the guiding document, that doesn't fit anymore, the one that's on here, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it's just here for reference purposes. Okay, I just wanted to double check.
And
'cause
yesterday,
that's outdated.
on the consent calendar yesterday, you actually passed a new version of the testing ethics document that was updated. So you will notice, I apologize for not pointing that out, the updated date on line 89. So that is now the the document as approved as of yesterday,
Yeah.
June 6, 2019.
Okay. Do we have questions from committee?
Yes, I do.
Board member comments.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have questions for audit because I've been concerned with the last the amount of stories that we've been getting from parents about since the rule changed. I know that a lot of LEAs jumped the gun and implemented the law before it was May 15th. 14th.
But could they have been following the rule, 404 where they opted in? Because I know that's...
Well, I don't know. The case was that the law was changed. That's the stories that parents were getting, was that because the law had changed, that it could now be applied. And I just wanted to let the board know what kind of stories are coming out from parents because of this rule change, because of this change in code. I know that parental rights have been are at odds with many because of the turnaround and achievement measurements, and so because of that opt-out, because of the misunderstanding that we have two systems here in Utah, that teachers and administration and parents don't know what's going on still. And so I just received a lot of stories about bullying, about kids being mistreated or lied to or manipulated in some way to take the test, and just not good stories. And so I'm waiting for audit to come and share how many were called in, what they know, what they found out, and all that.
Darren Nielsen, would you mind coming up to the table and responding to that? And I would just say, when you look at the testing ethics policy, that's not acceptable at all.
Well, whether it's in the test,
right?
I think because we had to address this in the ethics policy before.
But now it's in statute. And
well, no. But even before that, teachers weren't allowed to do what they did, and it still continues. There's still an issue. And there's alienation and a whole bunch of underhanded things going on that I'm concerned about. So, Darren.
Yeah, so I've responded to less than a half dozen. Audit doesn't send them all to me, but when they come in through the tip line, it's common for them on testing, potential testing violations to forward those to me. And then I'll do an initial investigation. You're correct, there are some. I don't know the number, how widespread. I don't know if it's an increase or decrease over previous years, but there's seems to always be some user issues. Individual teachers usually. Sometimes you can have a system, like a principal in a school that might have some kind of interpretation that's a problem, but most of them boil down to a teacher just misunderstanding how to interpret the rule. There were lots of questions initially about when does House Bill 118 take effect.
Right.
I probably had maybe close to 24 of those emails about once the legislative session ended, when does House Bill 118 take effect? And I believe in one of our assessment directors meetings there was a discussion about that as well. Those things. We're always on the watch for to try to train teachers so they don't misinterpret these. Because the testing ethics is pretty clear.
Yeah.
And we've updated that now, so next year hopefully it will reduce.
Teachers will be trained at the beginning of the year again.
It was interesting though, I had Ben Rasmussen yesterday tell me that I used to serve on UPAC as an educator, one of those seats. And so we would see testing ethics violations come before UPAC, 1 or 2 a year. And he told me last night that he saw more of those this year than any other year before, where teachers... Now, testing ethics violations, though, usually are teachers cheating on the test. Not necessarily misapplying the parental rights to testing, but so I don't know if that's just an anomaly this year.
So it seems like a funny year to cheat.
Well, I've heard where I've heard where the students opt out of the computer testing, but then the teachers would have them do writing testing and then take those tests and then implement them themselves, as though the student had taken the test online. So I've heard those stories.
Like an alternative learning activity, but it was
No,
a written
well,
test.
another test, and then, or they would, another option is that teachers would give a harder test or a harder assignment as a punishment for opting out. You know, the kids that took the assessment were awarded more often field trips.
Those should all go to the hotline.
I understand that. That's why I asked.
Okay, Debbie.
Yes,
Welcome.
and that's why
Welcome to the fun house.
And I've encouraged parents to report that. I mean, if I'm hearing that, please report, because we need to hear these stories.
Yeah.
The board needs to hear these stories because otherwise I'm not believed, and you know it's an issue, and then we have a lot of contention between parents and the teachers, and that's not fair. So, go ahead.
So Debbie Davis, Director of Internal Audit. We maintain the hotline, the public education hotline for the State Board of Education. And interestingly, I was actually just pulling the number of hotlines and everything that we had related to assessment. I thought, well, maybe I'll take that to the audit committee. We'll kind of see what's going on with the data. So I did pull it. What was it? Lots goes through my screen. So this year, from April to June, essentially, we had 14 hotlines related to assessment. Last year, we had 11. Of the total hotlines from April, kind of when we received the first hotline on assessment in April, to June to now, like as of yesterday, I guess, this year there were 45. So 31% of our hotlines that we received from April to June have been on assessment. Last year it was 26%. So 14 and 45. Last year was 11 and 43. Interestingly, I went through to kind of just get a feel for, well, what was the issue? What was kind of the category of the problem with the assessment? Interestingly, this year, the category with the most hits essentially was an issue with the form. And the biggest one was we filled out the form and they tested my kid anyway.
Yes.
And so that was the majority. There were 6 concerns like that. Also, concerns were related to, I feel like my child's being punished, my student's being punished, and sort of related to that also the alternative learning experience that was applied inappropriately, or there was a concern with it. And I know 2 or 3 of the ones that we took were, I opted them out, I kept them home so that there would be no problem. But then when we came back on Monday, they pulled my child out to take an alternative test a different day. That only my child had to take, nobody else, and so they missed this class activity or that. And so they felt it was an alternative and a punishment, kind of all wrapped into one. So those were the big categories this year. Last year it was more the highest category was they felt their students were being penalized. So that was the highest last year, and then couple on alternative, couple other report they're rewarding students, and opt-outs aren't part of that. And then I guess grade, that it was impacting their grade. There were a couple on that last year also. So that's kind of the data that we've seen with the hotlines that we've taken. So it tracked up just a little bit this year, but kind of the category did definitely shift this year from what we saw last year.
You know, I might be able to speak to that.
Yeah.
So with the new software platform that we have, the way that the parent exclusion code or the opt-out code is entered into the system, with the previous one you would enter the code for the student and it would show on every test for that student.
Yes.
This year, the way Questar system works, as a school, you'd have to enter it for each test. So that's one variable. The other variable, which is more problematic, is the previous system would allow the proctor to easily see an associated code with the student from the proctor screen. This system doesn't allow that. So as I dealt with a couple of those, it became clear that part of that testing when I gave the opt-out, when I provided an opt-out, you still tested, had to do with the field, the teacher or the proctor, not seeing or knowing that student was not supposed to test, and they administered the test.
Yeah, I saw that in my school, and it wasn't deliberate. But it was.
But moving forward on that, the solution for moving forward on that is
yeah, you've taken action.
I didn't mean that.
Say it louder for those.
No matter what happens, what we have, is there a remedy for that?
I mean, can we communicate with the parents? I mean, there's got to be some communication here because there's a lot of confusion at the local level on what is and what isn't and what the mistakes were. So if we can put out some kind of communication along those lines of saying, look, there was some something on the system that didn't allow for teachers to see that your student was opt out, that it wasn't necessarily your teacher who was wrong, maybe there can be some rift healed there.
Yeah.
With
And maybe
parents,
that's
because
something to look at when
because
we choose a new system.
Yeah, and we really
Needs to be
rely
like
on
a Lagoon wristband or something.
Yes, that's
we have relatively little communication directly with parents unless they call us. So we really rely on the LEA. The classroom teacher's the best communicator with the parent. And
but
that's
they're not getting that information from up here, and so we've got to do better. There's something
A
that we've
parent
got to
could
do
look
better.
at the testing ethics. I mean,
They wouldn't know where to go.
Where to look.
No. So
'Cause that's where I would.
we need to communicate with the LEAs better. The LEAs need to tell the teachers better. We need to let them know, the LEAs, this is what happened in this glitch.
Yeah.
And so the communication has to be clearer.
Well, and that might not be the only thing that happened. We also had in Alpine reported that they had entered opt-out codes, and then those had been removed or disappeared.
Yeah.
So we were investigating that with Questar early on. That was during the fall administration window as well. So what the core of the problem was for individuals is usually the ones that Debbie's passed on to me is just take some investigation to work your way down to find out what happened, and then I generally recommend the LEA communicate directly with the parent because they're the one that needs the relationship with them.
Board Member Cannon, you have a question?
Excuse me, yes. I'm wondering about kids getting a reward for participation.
Well, in the testing ethics, they can't.
They have been.
Okay, so they say that the testing, I did that on page 2. Students aren't rewarded for participating. But at one point, they could. The teachers could give a reward for a relevant course.
Academic.
An academic reward, but not
That's
an
right.
event.
So now on line 230, we don't have a teacher. We have an LEA may not provide a non-academic reward for students' participation or performance. So do we turn that around and say that an LEA can provide an academic, or a teacher can provide an academic reward? Is that what that means?
Yeah, so
It does.
this language comes directly out of House Bill 118. The prohibition on non-academic rewards is called out in House Bill 118. So we've inserted that here. The provision that allows for the results of the assessment to be used in their grade. Find where did that get inserted here? I think it's just removing the prohibition, right?
I didn't
Up
see.
on line 152 through. So an LEA, a school or educator may not use a student's score on a state-required assessment to determine the student's grade or a portion of the grade for the appropriate course. House Bill 118 allows that to happen, so we're recommending that you guys strike that language to align with the language of House Bill 118.
So, and I'm wondering, why does it take it to the LEA level instead of a teacher? Saying an LEA may not provide a non-academic reward. And nowhere does it say a teacher can provide an academic reward, or an LEA can provide. And why would we do it at the LEA level anyway?
That's a good question. That could be changed, obviously, here. If you want to change that to educator.
Go, please, Jeff.
So House Bill 118 did state that at the LEA level.
So we've got to be.
The law actually does say an LEA may not provide a non-academic reward in the actual code. So we just modeled right what the code said.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay, but will teachers be able to go through and interpret all this?
Well,
or?
when we get, when a local district gives us training, they don't give us the rule. I mean, we can access it, but they're going to give us in teacher language.
But there's nothing that would stop us from saying an LEA or educator, right? We can be more strict than that.
But if you
in
go,
like a guiding document.
LEA is broader,
Yeah,
so an
just like-
educator would just be just the teacher, and LEA means so
The principal, the paraprofessional, everybody,
anyone who works in the district.
okay, so if you go where, let's see, one of these was it the guiding document. One of these documents on line 230 says Utah LEAs and licensed Utah educators may not use a student score on a state-required assessment to determine the student's academic grade or a portion of the academic grade.
That's the one
So
that's
that-
outdated.
So
Yeah.
is that still?
No.
No. So
That was just reference for what used to be.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that was
So,
confusing.
so this is all confusing because I'm
Yeah.
thinking, okay, so
That was
here
what
it
was
says they
before.
can't, and here it says they.
Yeah, just ignore that document.
yes.
Delete it right now.
So, if I may, Chair.
Yeah.
So this is the heart of the problem for those that are advocating that are for parental opt-outs. This is rewarding kids to take an assessment that feeds into the achievement accountability measurements, right? That are basically on the backs of the students that take these tests, right? You mentioned that John, I can't remember his name, AIR.
John Cohen.
John Cohen, when he talked about assessments, he said these assessments are not for children's achievements or to show their gaps. This is about showing a school's accountability system. This is not to help the students. And I firmly believe what he said. I think it's unfair to reward kids that you're going to get a grade, right, to go forward on this, and then have the kids that are opt-out, well, what are they doing for extra credit to make sure they're as competitive with the students who get that extra credit on an assessment that it goes for accountability measurements? That's a concern for me. That's not an academic achievement. That is, I think there's a lot of ethics here that haven't been talked about. But,
And I think what we have to realize is that at this point it is in statute.
I know it's in statute,
And
but
I
it
understand
has
your
to be
concerns.
said out loud.
It
because
does. You're right.
nobody else is talking about this. And these are the concerns, because then it trickles down to the teacher to feel that pressure to put that kid in to make sure he gets that grade, to get those assessments, because it does reflect on that school and that community, and then you have a ripple effect. And so I'm incredibly concerned.
Right.
I will always be the
Right.
so.
And not that, I mean, I wanted to point out that I don't know this is the place to debate it because it's already done, but I do want to offer just a perspective as a classroom teacher that my students actually like it. I know I'm just a small population. They like that they aren't just taking a test for nothing. They like that they actually could get some credit for it. That's the feedback
What
that I got.
kid doesn't? But I'm just saying.
So, and it's really important data, and I just want to offer that perspective that it's not necessarily always on the back. It was almost freeing for a lot of students to say, oh, I want to know my score. My kids were excited to get their scores this year. They were so sad they couldn't get their Aspire scores until...
They've never not been able to get their scores.
No, yes they have. Yes they have.
I thought they were given every single time.
Well, because we can get into that later, but they don't get their Aspire scores until they do some norming and those kind of things.
Because that's what was told to us at the very beginning, that they'll get their scores automatically every single year.
The first year is different with Aspire.
But what I'm talking about is the accountability measurements at the state level that determine whether the school goes into turnaround or not.
Yeah, I understand.
A student doesn't understand that. A teacher does. And so when a teacher says, oh, I want the student to take the test because if I don't, then it affects my accountability measurements, and then, heaven forbid that my school goes into turnaround and that I may lose my job. Right? I mean, that's putting the teacher between a rock and a hard place, and the student is the bearer of this burden, but the student doesn't know that. And when you have parents and teachers debating on, whether this test is good or not, because I personally believe it's not valid, because when you have this test being taken to Stanford, and the Stanford is also a contributing factor to Park and SBAC and everything, there's no independent validity there. So I don't believe it's valid. I don't know, how much of it is psychological testing from AIR questions, which I've already talked to Darren about. What's that percentage? So I have issues with the test itself, but other than that, I think the whole system is messed up. But
that is a debate
It
maybe
needs to
another
be had.
time, but
no,
I mean,
it
those
needs
are
to be
good-
had, and I don't know
Yeah.
if it's going to be had after I leave. But go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to propose an amendment.
Okay.
The amendment would be on line 230.
Okay, give us a second to get there.
And I would like it to say, an LEA may provide an academic reward instead of the double negative, may not provide non-academic. I think that is a clarification.
Okay, so the motion before the committee, and I do want to ask what you guys think about this, but the motion before the committee is to change line 230 from an LEA may not provide a non-academic reward to an LEA may provide an academic reward, correct?
Correct.
Okay, is there discussion to that motion?
Can I just say something
Yes,
to that?
please.
So I'm going to read the language out of House Bill
Right.
115 that's related to this, because you may want to add some words.
Yeah, I think we might need
The
both.
teacher may use a student's score on a standards assessment adopted under subsection 2 to improve, so this is something we haven't talked about, to improve the student's academic grade for or demonstrate the student's competency within a relevant course. So in House Bill 118, they go through each of the tests and call that out specifically in that language. So it has to, you can use it to improve a grade or demonstrate competency within a relevant course is how the language they put in there.
Okay.
And I will add, as a teacher, I think it's important to have that a non-academic, because we get really confused. There's so many things, and it's like, okay, so I can't give them an ice cream party, but I can give extra credit or something like that. Like, I think we might need that language as well. So, Janet, you had a question first, and then we'll go to
Well, I was just thinking about what Darren said.
Okay.
I'm wondering about saying an LEA may provide an academic reward or something about competency.
Or to improve the student's academic grade, or for the demonstration, or to demonstrate the student's competency within a relevant course. And they put that in there because sometimes
That's what I was going to say.
If-
So, board rule or writing, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not supposed to really just repeat what's in statute. Is that correct? So, what we need to do is just go back to statute.
And can we just say an LEA may provide rewards in accordance to da-da-da-da-da?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
And then say an LEA may not provide a non-academic award. I think we can spell that out, but just
Or we can just keep that.
just add one line.
So, I don't know if Janet, you want to amend?
Okay, but yes.
We're in the middle of an amendment.
Let's amend. Come on, group.
Wait 1 second. I think, Sarah, do you have a comment on that?
I
Do you want to
just
come to the
wanted-
table?
yes.
Tell us who you are.
Sarah Jones with UEA. I just wanted to point out when this HB 118 was being drafted, we had a conversation with the bill sponsor about the lines that Darren just read, the teacher may use a student's score, because the person issuing the grade is the teacher, not the LEA.
Yes.
So as you're thinking about what you're trying to articulate between the academic and non-academic reward, we had said, it really needs to be the teacher care how they use that as part of their grading policy under the direction of the LEA for issuing the, or for using that in the student's grade. So I just kind of put that out there as the caution about how you involve the LEA part as you're crafting this language.
Is it possible that an entire school could give a reward, though? Instead of just having the teacher do it, could the entire school say, okay, we are going to raise, everybody gets this level, we're going to
I don't see how that can practically happen
Is it possible for them to do that?
I guess it's possible. You could say anybody who gets a proficiency score or has growth, you get 10 points of extra credit or whatever, but teachers' grading scales are different. The weighting is different.
I just don't want to restrict something.
But it is possible. So I wonder if when we do the amendment, we could say an LEA, but then add that
I
language.
just went to it out of board.
So that we get a teacher in there.
So if it says a teacher, comma, under the direction of an LEA, comma, may provide an academic reward for a student.
So it's these three. So
For
actually three
may provide an academic reward.
The language you just looking at.
You don't, like, under the direction, or we go back to refer back to the statute. What did you say, Linda?
Okay, would going back to the statute, address your concern about it being the teacher, because doesn't the statute say the LEA?
The statute in the reference to the teacher part is talking strictly about grade.
An LEA may
It's not about reward
according to
Okay.
the statute.
All right, let's bring it back here according to. So, Janet, I'm wondering if you're amending your motion to say something like you said, a teacher under the direction of an LEA may provide a reward according to.
And what would the
HB 118
reference
be?
But I was just clarifying with Board Member Canada that when it's referencing the teacher part in House Bill 118, it's not using the generic reward language. It's using language that a teacher can use this to improve a student's academic grade. So it feels a little bit different when you're talking about an LEA rewarding. Because that could be, I'm not really sure how that's interpreted, but the language in the statute was pretty specific about you can use the standardized test score to improve the grade. And that's a teacher discretion because the teacher does the grading policy.
Sarah, let me ask you, is this clear though? A teacher under the direction of an LEA may blah 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 blah. Like does
provide, but is it going to be the?
That's why I said blah blah blah. Depending on what
the reward part starts to get a little confusing.
Okay, Jeff.
So there's
two
different sections to House Bill 118.
Yeah.
There's a section regarding the grade, and the teacher can help improve the grade. But the section talking about the non-academic reward is the parental rights law. It's actually a different part of the Utah Code. And that entire section of Utah Code only addresses LEAs, does not address teachers. And that section of HB 118 is under subsection 9, which is the section that states, at the request of a student's parent or guardian, LEA shall excuse a student from taking an assessment that, and then it lists these things and then also states an LEA may not provide a non-academic reward. So although it's all getting to the same end, to Sarah's point, they are slightly different in what they're.
So we need to leave that section alone.
That's also spelled out in 534303, which isn't parental rights, that's administration.
Correct.
So so it's several places.
Yeah. Lisa, you had a comment. Was it on this amendment? Because we'll need to deal with this amendment before we. Okay. Dana, did you want to?
I'm looking for the part that deals with the teacher. And I'm not finding
in
it.
HB 118 it says a teacher may use a student score on the standards assessment adopted under subsection 2 to improve the student's academic grade or demonstrate the student's competency within a relevant course. That's what Darren just said.
Right, and that's in the bill.
Yeah, but
so
I'm looking for where we address what the teacher can do in the rule.
But if it's in the code, we just put it in code.
Yeah, we
right?
just say according
we
Correct.
Just
there is nothing
reference
in the
the code.
The rule is all addressing LEA.
But do we reference the code at all in the
Here's
rule?
the code.
Yes.
Okay, I was going to say, I thought we did. Could you tell me what lines? Do you know? Because maybe we're just talking, and we don't need to. Oh, yes. Is it 7?
And I could be wrong, Jeff, but when you write a rule, right, you just reference the statute.
Yes.
You don't.
We're not supposed to
copy
repeat.
and paste the same lines into the.
You are correct.
Because in case statute change it, yeah.
Yep, that gets us come down.
So let's have Jeff point out where we're looking, and then.
So it's actually really in the definition section. When we're talking about what an assessment is, we reference the section, so like on line 26, we generally reference the college readiness assessment. That's one of the two pieces of HB 118 that now allows a teacher to improve a student's grade. But if you're looking for something more direct about the teacher, then no, we do not actually reference that in this rule.
Do you have a suggestion as to where it would be good to put that, or appropriate?
That's a good question. I will state as a general policy, we try really hard in rule not to get down to the teacher level. We try to make rules about LEAs.
And then
the LEAs take it to the teacher level, which is why you'll find in 404 we've never really gotten down to the teacher level. Like, granted, there are exceptions to every rule. So generally, we try not to write rules at that level.
So and the same is it the same policy as why we always put superintendent? We don't say specific staff. We just say superintendent. That means the office staff, right?
Correct. And I would also state as a general rule, we do not make rules a user manual.
Right.
You have statute, you have rule, and then a guidance document could be a user manual that says, here's what statute and rules state. So I would also say I would be very careful to start trying to put everything in the rule that's already repeated in statute.
Right.
Unless you just want to say in accordance with this subsection so people know where to look.
But it does say it in the definitions.
It does reference those sections.
It's really vague.
Yes.
It is very
You
vague.
really have to dig deep to get that.
And I have
out
to
of
tell you, as a
that
teacher,
definition.
I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I never read a rule until I was on the state. I mean,
Yeah.
I read them, but I read the guiding documents. I read
You have policy.
and I had policies, and I read my district stuff. Yeah.
So back to the amendment. Could we say an LEA may
Where?
provide
Say where first, please.
Line 230.
Line 230.
Okay.
An LEA may provide an academic reward. May provide an academic reward
In accordance with. But again, it
53E-4305 and 53E.
Okay.
Because there's two sections of code. I would agree, actually, though, with Sarah,
Yeah.
that we might want to use the word
Yeah.
may allow a teacher to improve a grade rather than
Yes,
say
that's what I was
academic
going to say.
reward. Because the sections of code don't actually talk about
Okay,
reward.
so
do you want to restate
phrase
that?
that as an amendment.
So I would say an LEA may allow educators to improve a student's grade in accordance with 53E4-305 and
Good.
53E, whatever, there's two citations.
Jeff, we use the word on 218,
Okay,
we use the
okay.
word teacher,
So,
right? Just above that.
we don't
We do
mess
use
up.
the word
So the motion before the
Yeah,
committee
so I don't know
is
if we
an
want to
amended
do that
motion,
instead of
I
educate.
guess, to leave that other part.
Rewrite.
Yes, but to add, an LEA may allow educators to improve a student's
Says
grade
educator
in
and-
accordance with blah, 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 blah. But you really heard me say the correct.
Do we need, Jeff, do you think we need to say reward a student's grade for a student's participation in or performance on the assessment?
I don't think we need that because
Can't
that's,
be participation. It
Yeah.
has to be the score.
It has to be the score.
Okay.
because that's in the statute.
Correct.
So if we just say how Janet so beautifully said it, an LEA may allow educators to improve a student's grade in accordance with da, 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 da.
So let me ask a question.
Okay.
What
Discussion to the
way,
motion.
The way we've worded that, where we say that LEA may, House Bill actually puts the onus on the teacher to make the decision. In our rule now, we're saying, if I'm hearing that right, we're saying the LEA will determine whether the teacher has that right.
So maybe we go back to a teacher under the
You could
direction of
make it
LEA.
Say an LEA shall.
Oh, shall.
No, but we're instructing teachers on other things. A teacher may contact a parent, it says.
Yes.
It says that an educator may not. So we're down at that level in this rule.
You are
Yeah.
correct.
Darren, what do you think?
I like sticking with teacher.
So
I like what Sarah said, the teacher's the one who makes the decision in concert with the parent and the student about grading through their syllabus and those agreements that they make.
So
I
you
like-
strike out an LEA, just said educators may improve students' grades in accordance with, except you have to have something about participation or.
No, you
No,
can't
no, no,
reward
no,
them.
no, sorry, not
Yeah, the
participation. Yeah, I
can't
just
be
took
part
that
of it.
back in my head. So you just simply say educators may improve students' grade.
Teachers may use the results.
That's what I'm looking for.
Okay. Teachers
Or
may
state
provide an
May use-
academic reward.
No, because we want to do the improved students'
In
grade.
accordance to. In accordance
May
with-
use.
Improve.
How about teacher? The word from the code is a teacher may use a student's score.
We could
Use a
To
student
improve.
score to improve in accordance with.
But again, we're using
And
the
then we're
code
just
again.
right back to the
But
code.
yeah, then we're back to putting exactly what the code says.
You have not, with the amendment, you're not providing
Any more
difference
information.
in statute.
And that's what we're not supposed to do, is to copy and paste the wording from code.
No, if we reference the code, then
Yeah.
it gives us a signal that hey, if the code changes, then we need
You're,
to update
Jeff,
this.
as a
And I
rule
agree,
writing
and
expert.
I think in defense of the amendment, I'm sorry as I'm talking out loud and thinking
No,
out loud.
please, we all talk out loud.
The point really being, there is nowhere in the rule that signals that specific piece
Yeah.
of 118,
So I can
which
see
is
how
your
it's good to
concern.
have it.
Yes.
So just signaling that part of 118, I think, is fine. We could even insert a new section and leave everything else as is and just say, and renumber these after 8, but insert a new 9 that says an educator may, and then just leave the rest And
Yeah,
we never,
I think that might be good too, because then.
Yeah, an educator may blah, 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 according to code
So-
sections.
So is this rule in a hurry, or could we direct staff
we direct you to just-
do a rewrite?
That way we get it right.
Yep.
Okay, I think
and
that's
then
good.
I have one other thing on.
But wait,
Are
can
we-
we just direct, or do we need to make a motion to do that? We need to, no, we can just
That's
direct.
what we got.
Okay, right.
Let's just direct.
Then
staff.
Direct. You got it,
Before
Jeff?
September.
Okay.
Is that soon enough?
You're good with it sitting for 2 months?
Okay, so this is just
3 months?
a technicality.
Back into the timeline really
Like,
fast.
are there too many
Nobody's going
whiches
to take
in
any
this
tests.
sentence?
What line?
No.
184.
Let's take
Parents are primarily responsible for their children's education and have the constitutional right to determine which aspects of public education, including assessment systems, in which their children participate.
I'm okay with it.
Does that make sense? All those switches?
Or just two.
To determine which aspects of public education in which their children participate. I don't know.
As long as it's spelled correctly.
It just sounded awkward.
Which?
It doesn't bother
I
me,
can
but
take that
I'm
into
open
So
to it.
you might want to work on the awkwardness.
Okay. Lisa, now you had a comment that wasn't related to the amendment that you wanted either a question or a comment that you've been so patiently waiting. Do you remember it? After all that?
It's just, is there, I think one component that hasn't been addressed is if Linda's had asked, how do you reward a whole school if they opt into a test? Well, of those kids that are opt out of a test, they're going to feel defeated, right? I wasn't rewarded because my parents didn't let me in, right? What happens to that student who knows that the majority of their classmates are getting a reward based on their scores, right, in their grades? What happens to that student who says, well, what about my grades? What about my reward? Right? Is there something that we can write in or maybe approach the legislator and say, what do we do for those kids? How can we encourage them to make up the grade, right? Because otherwise, I think there's gonna. I think that they're being punished, right? There's that feeling of I'm being punished because I didn't get a reward, and there's no way for me to get extra credit because it's not associated with the test, so I'm being punished.
So, because
I think there's a mentality there that we need
we
to
don't
cover.
have that written anywhere.
No,
correct?
that's what I'm saying.
I'm asking Darren.
Well, there's still all the protections to parental rights in place that you can't penalize a student.
And so
you can't offer rewards. So really what this is doing, I know the word extra credit gets used a lot, and I come from a district where extra credit's prohibited.
Yeah.
So I struggle with that word, but that it's a line of evidence. So all of us are in the same class. A few of you take the test, a few of us don't. It seems reasonable the teacher would use every piece of evidence they've got to determine the student's grade. We talked earlier about what comes in through the audit line, and a lot of those issues have to do with feelings that a student's being put at a disadvantage or penalized. I don't know that we can eliminate all those because you get individual practices by teachers that can happen, but I don't think your rule contributes to that. I don't think the rule's promoting that kind of practice.
And let me just respond to that. And I will say that as a teacher, if you're looking at, you cannot penalize a student. So just as a concrete example, the students I had who opted out, I gave them another learning activity, which was really just a way for me to see if they understood line of evidence. If they reached competency, then that's when I would have given them the whatever, improve their grade, that kind of thing.
Or an exceptional teacher, and I'm just
I'm just saying. But if teachers are looking at they need to remember that you can't penalize a student, and you need to provide other ways for them. Anyway, I don't know that
the case. My other thing is, can we define what academic reward is? I think
that's in the bill.
Is it a field trip? Is it?
No.
Is it?
It has to be to improve
a letter
their
grade.
To improve their grade.
Yeah, that's how it's
towards their
defined.
grade. Okay, so it is in the bill.
Or, so there's two things, improve their grade or demonstrate competency on a relevant course.
So demonstrating competency, would that be identifying animals at the zoo on a field trip?
No, it has to still affect the grade. Yeah.
Well, I know, but if that's a graded measurement or if that's a graded activity, and the student who opts out cannot go on that field trip because they opted out.
Oh, that's only if they want to. I mean, maybe they're...
No? Am I not? Okay.
I don't think that...
I've been hearing similar stories, so I'm trying to.
If we speak to, and I,
Please.
Chair,
No, don't.
if we speak to the intent, then the intent would be that the alternative activity that's being provided or the reward that's being given would then not have some sort of double jeopardy involved with it, which would be by while they're attending that they're achieving some sort of academic standard and being graded on that as well, or assessed on that as well. So if every student's not being provided that opportunity that's outside of it, then it would not, the intent would not be that they would then have like some sort of double jeopardy. You weren't allowed to go on the reward, and at the reward more education took place, therefore we denied you that educational opportunity. So that is not the intent, is what I would be trying to state on that. Which would then hopefully show up in a hotline call if it did happen. And
that's what I'm saying. I'm hoping they call in and share those stories, because I've heard those stories, and and I've always encouraged, please call it in, please call it in. And
no, those are so you could direct staff to follow up on that too.
Okay, so I think we have a motion.
So I would move that we direct Jeff, right, to bring back the changes. Do you have enough information on the changes that we need, Jeff?
Yes.
To our 277404 draft one. That would be draft 2. Draft 2 next.
In the August meeting?
In our August standards and assessment.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is to direct staff to amend R277404 draft 2 and bring it back in the August meeting. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you for your discussion. Thanks, staff, for reading between the lines and figuring out what we're talking about. Guys are great.
Thanks, Debbie.
Oh, and Debbie, thanks for running down here. Okay.
This is the one that's...
Yeah, this is the one they just decided to. Okay, so we're on 6.4, which is R277733. You guys have seen this one quite a lot. We had lots of changes. Scott's been really great about picking things out. So finally we decided just to scratch the whole thing out and start over so that we get all the little nitpicky changes. So,
and I had a question about that. If you scratch everything out, is that like repealing it, or?
Yes, this is
a
repeal.
So that's a repeal.
Oh, so this is...
It's a repeal and a rewrite.
Okay, so
right.
our thing said first reading, and I just thought, why isn't this a repeal?
Because it's been rewritten, yeah. So Jeff, why don't you give us some background,
Sure.
please?
This was one of those rules that caught me by surprise as well, so I have to thank this wonderful committee for their very good eyes. And the original plan was we had
701,
I believe, and 733. The two rules that delineate down to the $50,000 level of when you can carry over funds in your adult education funds. And we want the option in both rules was 10% or 50,000. 50,000 at a budgetary level is a little too focused, so we wanted to take the $50,000 level out of both rules. We passed the first rule. The second one, we were taking out the 50,000. We also took a deeper dive into this rule, though, because it does incorporate by reference the Adult Education Policy and Procedures Manual. And as we actually took a really deep dive, Brian and I realized as we were looking line by line between both documents, large chunks of this rule are not needed if you incorporate that document by reference. So once we started hitting, that's
good
great.
Work.
So we hit that tipping point where we're just deleting too much, so we're just going to delete the whole thing, and we're going to rewrite a much shorter version.
Great.
And that's what you have before you today. Starting on line 508 is where you actually get the new rule. Everything before that is just a deletion. And we included in here everything that does not show up in the policy document itself. Made sure the URL is correct. We have the correct version listed of this document, the March version. We have some definitions that we didn't actually have a definition in statute or in any other rule that we could find. And then it just kind of goes through what is and is not allowed regarding some of the funds, the federal funds, the state funds, the program curriculum and the outcomes that need to come from this program itself that aren't already outlined inside the policy document. And of course, at the end, there's the supplemental award program as well, that where that carryover funds actually funnels into, so that those who don't have carryover kind of redisperse those funds. We're happy to answer any questions that may exist regarding elements of the program, what this is highlighting versus the document. But that is what you have before you, is a much tailored rule with an incorporation by reference, which hopefully makes it a little bit easier to follow.
Board Member Linda Hansen has a question.
I do have a question. The very, very last, on line 713 through 715, do we have, is that part of the legislation, or are we just taking that out? I've had legislators yell at me because we took it out without permission, so I'm a little bit sensitive about that part. So the 2% of the appropriation, have we just decided that we're going to take that without, or has the legislature said it was okay for us to take that?
So there is nothing directly in statute about this 2%, so no. But we do have general purview of the appropriation. So this is specifically about the appropriation and the purview that you were allowed to have. That in the past, and this was in existence in the old rule as well, that the 2% was taken out for that monitoring piece. So that's something that the board decided at some point in the past, and we did not take that out here. I don't know if you have any other context to present.
Does that answer your question, Linda?
Yeah, I was going to say Brian was there when we got yelled at before, so yeah, we're good.
Okay, well, as long as you both got yelled at. I don't want to discriminate here.
So, yeah.
Board Member Cannon.
Just tell us how much money we're talking about that's going to this adult education program.
So Brian Olmstead, coordinator, student support, and we have about $14 million of state money, and then we bring in about $3.6 million federal dollars, which is referenced in here as well, the distribution of federal funds.
Because I know typically the federal funds will allot a percentage for administrative costs. And I think it's usually more than 2%. But this 2% is, when it says the board may designate up to 2% of the appropriation, is that something that is, who determines that? I mean, does it come to us? Is it determined at your level? How do we know whether or not you're getting that 2% for administrative costs?
So my understanding, and I always stand to be corrected as I continue to learn, is that it is prioritized with your budget, your budgetary approvals that you do. So it's put in there, and that it is approved by the board with that whole lump package when you approve the annual budget.
It's your finance.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I'm all in favor of having some money for administration because it drives me crazy when they pass legislation and they say, do this huge program and don't provide any.
Yeah. Just one board for you.
I brought that up.
When the legislature does that,
our senator sometimes.
I brought that up. I said when we look too much to measure what we're doing, that increases our administration costs tremendously. So I have brought that up 3 times now.
We'd like to welcome Senator Green to our committee.
And I agree that it's good to have it. I just don't want us to get yelled at again.
Yeah.
If it's somebody's bell and they didn't expect that to be taken out, and we did.
I'll make a note to double check
to
make sure that we're not stepping into legislative territory where we shouldn't be. But as far as I understand, based on the research I did, we are okay on this one.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have just a couple. We talked about this a little bit before. Maybe you can just refresh my memory. 537, we define adult as an individual 18 years or older. We talked a little bit about emancipation, talked about people who are in the military or whatever that helps them to emancipate. I don't see that definition used anywhere else in the rule except where we say that adults can be in adult education. We can enroll them in adult education, but we do enroll people that are younger than 18 years of age in adult education. Is that the right definition?
Is that in R277100? Is that one of our?
I'm just looking at 5.
Is that in R277100? Is that
It is
one of our?
not in 100. No, it is not part of
The adult. I know we've had this conversation.
We have, and I
talked
felt like
about
there
it
was a
before.
solution.
I just don't know how it's resolved.
It seems like
And I haven't gone back and read the.
Yeah, Brian, could you help
If
us
I can,
out with
if I can
Yeah.
speak, so as a definition, there's the combination of adults, and then down on 599, out of school youth. And so the population to be served is a combination of adults and out of school youth. And I agree with you. It's odd that we have to define adult, but I'm guessing historically that's necessary at some point.
But we're defining it restrictively because an adult legally would be an emancipated youth or a number of other things. It doesn't necessarily just mean 18 or older. So I'm just wondering if is there a reason we're defining it like that?
That's actually a great question.
I don't know that there is a reason why.
Yeah, down below we've got out of school years.
Yeah. Are you asking for a different definition?
Well, I don't know. Would we restrict someone who's 17 years of age? They'd be classified as an out of school youth?
Correct, because they are eligible for the K-12 system.
Mm-hmm.
And so then at that point they're out of school if they're engaging.
And so maybe it works.
It's a combination of the two creates the population.
So the referred document that we have, does it use that term?
It uses both adult and out of school youth throughout the document.
Okay, and it covers everyone we want to. Okay. And then educate me on 545. What is an 8.9 grade level? That means they haven't been into 9th grade?
Correct.
Okay.
That's as close as you can come.
Thank you.
8.9.
Come on, 8.99. I just missed the last day.
I've talked to a few of those.
Yeah, grade equivalency, so that'd be 8 years, 9 months. So basically it's the end of your 8th grade year.
Okay. Yeah, I figured it was something like that, but I hadn't seen 8.9th grade anywhere. 623. This one, so this is on carryover, and they can carry over up to 10%. It says that they'll submit a request, and then it says the superintendent may consider excess funds. Did we talk about making that shall? That's because 10% now is a pretty good chunk of money for some of these larger districts, and then the next year when she's allocating funds, I would prefer that to be a shall, that she would look at that. It doesn't say that she'll deduct it. It just says that she will consider.
Shall consider.
Yeah. On 623, I think we made that change on the other.
That
on the
sounds
sister.
very familiar.
You are right.
It probably got lost in translation.
We can make that correct.
So are you making an amendment?
I am.
Okay.
A
Would you
motion to amend line 623 to replace the word may with shall.
Okay, the motion before the committee is to replace the word may on line 623 with the word shall. So it reads, the superintendent shall consider excess funds. Discussion to that motion? 623. I'll say it again. So on line 623, it currently says the superintendent may consider excess funds, and the amendment or the motion for the committee is to change the word may to shall, so it reads the superintendent shall consider excess funds. Discussion to the motion?
Well, it looks like shall is in
It's
3,
in all the others
shall
except
is in
2.
5, and shall is in 6.
So where did we leave this one this week? There must have been a reason if they were going through and doing all the
Except,
shells.
yes. I think it was
We
an
were
oversight.
supposed to, I
Yeah.
think it was supposed to be changed.
I think so too, because I remember talking. Gosh, how did you do that? I'm so impressed.
Be impressed.
Okay, well, I just said. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Question, Janet?
Just a little technical thing. So it's on line 565. Eligible adult education student means an individual who provides documentation that the individual is a primary and permanent residency is in Utah. So why don't we say is a primary and permanent resident of Utah?
Thank you.
Yeah. Can we consider that grammatical or technical, or do we? Yeah, okay. So when we make the final motion, we'll do it like grammatical. It's my favorite one. It's my new favorite one. Love it. Okay, any other questions or any other catches you guys found? Okay, then I'm looking for a final motion for R2777-3. Janet?
I move that we approve R277-733 as amended and on first reading, and move that the board approve it on second and final reading.
Including grammatical and technical changes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the
That
motion
was an amendment. Yeah.
So, the motion before the committee is to approve the amendments to R277, 7 through 3, draft 1, on first reading, and including grammatical and technical changes. And if approved by the committee, forward recommendations for approval to the board on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we did it. We finally passed this rule.
Thank you.
Oh, it's been a fun
It's a
journey.
lot of work on you guys' part. Thanks.
Well, we've been working on it.
It can't be as long as
Well, that's true. That's true. Never mind. It's not a record or anything. Okay, our next action item is 6.5, R277607, the truancy prevention. This is an amendment and a continuation. Sounds like there's going to be an interim study and for 2020 legislation. So, Jeff, go ahead and tell us what we need to know. Corby, do you want to come to the table? Of course you do.
Thank you, Chair. So 607 is a 5-year continuation of the truancy prevention rule. You're going to notice a lot of deletion in the definition section, and that's because all of those terms are defined in code. So we just reference the code citation. And then most of this, although it does look messy, and the following rule after this will look messy as well, it's mostly reorganization so that it actually flows and makes sense. The old version referenced the truancy policy, would talk about some other stuff, and then a different section would say, oh yeah, by the way, that policy include this too. So we want to make sure all the policy requirements are in one section, all the procedures are in another section, so it's very clear as to what's being required. But there shouldn't be any substantive changes here, just trying to make it read a little more clearly.
Good.
And as mentioned, no substantive changes really, because this is going to be studied in the interim, and legislation is coming in 2020. So this rule will be back probably in the spring sometime with whatever comes from the 2020 session.
Okay, question?
Could you elaborate more on what changes might be coming with regards to truancy?
So the interim study right now is looking at absenteeism generally. A recent study came out that Senator Hilliard in particular saw, and he made reference that Utah was higher in absenteeism rates than he was comfortable with, and he wanted to understand what's leading to that. We will do our best to provide that. I mean, there's so many variables that could lead into that. That's not likely the conclusion we're going to come to. But one issue we do want to look at is getting better data, because that's one of the issues we don't know how to readily answer. So one of the things we are looking at here is collecting from LEAs excused and unexcused absences. Is right now we don't collect excused and unexcused, we just collect absences, which doesn't really tell us if what Senator Hilliard has read is correct and we're higher up on our rates. We don't really know what that means. Yes, absentee, but is it we have high rates of excused absences? Do we have high rates of unexcused absences? Unexcused absences is going to relate more to a behavioral issue, which would look at very different interventions.
Maybe not.
Potentially, and if they're excused absences, that's a completely different discussion altogether, whether or not there's even a policy lever you'd want to pull at that point. But that's kind of where we're starting at with them, them being the legislature. They may want to take it in a different direction altogether. But
Corby, I saw you nodding your head. Did you have something to add?
No, I agree.
Okay, just that you really
Jeff,
agree.
Yes.
Okay,
especially with the data.
Okay, board member Cummins, you had another question.
So, is there a discussion about the differences between absenteeism and truancy? Because those are two different things.
Yeah,
correct.
And I don't want one to penalize the other because of higher rates and numbers.
Correct.
And I don't want it to infringe on parental rights.
Absolutely. And that again goes back to excused and unexcused. And to be truant, you have to have an unexcused absence. And that also gets into the conversation of what is an absence. Right. How long are you gone before you're absent is also part of this discussion. And if there is, and then that also brings in the concept of chronic absenteeism, which could be excused or unexcused absences, but a student who's just not attending school at a certain level or higher.
So I have a couple more questions. So how does this, when it comes to competency-based education, And if we're going in the route of a more personalized education, and that could possibly bring up seat time, the 900 hours versus the 180 days, all of that. How is that conversation coming in as well?
Yes.
And if Senator Hilliard is concerned because of the lack of students being in school, is he going to be okay when a student is not in school because it's a competency-based education model and their education is out in the world, right?
Those are all fair points and things that will be considered. And I don't know if Deputy Superintendent Norman would like to add in on that.
And in talking to this complete issue, the very beginning is to establish common definitions for the purpose of just being able to analyze and document where we're at. With that, when it comes to competency-based education and personalized learning, which is one of the board's strategic goals, then we're talking about students attaining mastery. So when we're talking about coming up with habitual truancy, we're trying to say these students are at risk of not graduating. And so we're trying to establish what sort of interventions can help this student in progressing through their academic achievement. When we're talking about competency-based education, we're talking about here are the standards and how can they demonstrate mastery or proficiency within the standards in order to have those academic skills as outlined so that they can then be successful in achieving those goals that have been set out for them. So this is really talking about how can we help students achieve. And then on this conversation is what are those proficiencies and how do we determine, and it will be a part of that 990, 180. You're exactly right, so you hit it right on the head. But these are two different conversations in how do we support students who may be falling through the cracks, or in one school, for example, they determine an absence based on a student missing one period. Another school is for the entire day or for half a day. Now when we aggregate that data, it will look like one school has 680 and then another school that probably has the same number of students being absent is only 100 based on what they determine an absence looks like. And so being able to have common data then helps them be able to target money as a legislature to say what can we do to help students and increase supports and then be able to, so the discussion isn't about infringing upon parent rights. In fact, that is a part of the discussion to help knowing that they're not doing that, but just have common definitions, then to be able to say what interventions are needed, how do we fund those interventions, and then this conversation is about mastery, proficiency, academic success, and goal attainment.
Good. Okay. Any other questions from committee? That not answer your question?
It does. I mean, it does. But
I was like,
it does. I'm just concerned that it would lead to more parental or less parental rights, more student oversight, where especially we give the LEAs the definition to say, well, what does competency look like, right? And if competency is limited according to the LEA, then what does that translate into seat time or into overhead? Money's coming down to the LEA. What does that translate to?
Please. And I don't know if Sarah Young is here, but one of the things that we've been doing, and competency-based education is something that we've really been working on as a board and had a lot of support from the legislature. In fact, Senator Milner was championing that bill with competency-based education. With that right now, and Sarah's come in and Sarah Young has come in and talked about what that looks like with our portrait of a graduate, and that's the work that we're going to be doing now for the next, so in our cycle of what that looks like. So we've now established our portrait of a graduate, then it's moving into that competency-based. And I think, how many schools do we have right now? 14 new ones that are being added on to the pilot, and then they're implementing those things. It's not going to be determined that this is what competency-based looks like, but instead here's the menu of options that are out there that local context can then be able to draw from. So that's where we're at right now. There's not the one-size-fits-all model, nor will there be, because context matters. Right. So that's what they're working on right now. And then with that high school graduation, those requirements that are coming down, and I think it's about 2022, help me with my timelines. I don't have that right now in front of me, but yeah. So, but it's a process that's going to occur over time and become polished in that process. And so,
I just hope going forward, if Senator Hilliard is going to look at that he projects that 2022 implementation, that we're not boxing in LEAs and seat time.
That's actually what we're trying not to do.
Right. That's because that would be detrimental to everything back. So
that's a great point to keep in mind.
And I think that's why you decide which if it's an absence, is it an excuse? Like, because you weren't going to be counting it an absence if it's like a competency-based.
Well,
anyway, I see your
depends.
concerns,
It depends on the definition at the LEA level. What is a competency, activity, right? I mean, if I take my student to go see Europe, are we covering U.S. history, literature, and all that stuff? So.
Okay. Any other questions from committee? Janet.
Can I make a motion?
I would love that.
Okay, I move that we approve a 5-year continuance and amendment of R277-607.
Okay, the motion before the committee is that we approve the continuation and amendments of R277-607, Draft 1 on first reading, and then forward recommendations for approval to the board on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion?
I might understand this will be back in our laps in a few months.
Yeah, this one will.
Thanks.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you, guys. Okay, we are on 6.6, action item. It's R277-475, Patriotic, Civic, and Character Education. This is an amendment, and seems like this one is just updating it in accordance with House Bill 140. And Jeff, will you go ahead and talk to us about this?
Absolutely, thank you, Chair. So actually 2 bills, House Bill 140 and House Bill 387, triggered pulling this rule down and amending it. And those 2 bills, if you don't recall, House Bill 140 deletes the civic and character education report that LEAs had to provide to the Lieutenant Governor's office. Then House Bill 387 repealed the Civic and Character Education Commission, which received that report. And this rule referenced both that report and the commission. So we pulled this rule down so that we could update it, and we also, it was a rule that had not been updated with the current formatting standards, so we did that as well. Again, this one's going to look scarier, hopefully, than it is in terms of the edits. And I will go through each edit if that is okay with the chair to kind of hopefully bring some comfort into what's happening here. So again, I will preface a big chunk of this rule was a direct copy and paste of statute and current statute. So what we did is there are chunks that we took out because it is in code. And you'll also see some definitions that were referenced that are also in code. So as you go through the definition section, you will see the areas where we have updated it in relation to R277-100 and to the statute. Move the authority and purpose up to be the first section. And then as we jump down into starting around line 46, you're going to see on lines 51 to 53 a deletion. That is a direct copy and paste of statute. So we took that out because it's required anyway. Line 57 and 58 is actually line 113 being moved up into a section where it makes a little more sense. And as we continue moving forward, down on lines 74 to 78, you have a few things added in conjunction with statute, because I wanted to make sure as we were deleting things that we were doing what I failed to do in 404, which is still referencing the applicable sections of code. The only substantive thing I do want to point out that we are changing here is line 77. That is a section of the Utah Criminal Code that discusses the criminal penalties for defacing the flag. Thought that would probably be an important thing to incorporate into your instruction of the United States flag, is that the state does have a criminal law on what would happen to you if you deface it. Lines 81 to 95 looks like a big deletion about the Pledge of Allegiance. Still required. This is all part of code. In fact, this entire section is verbatim. So we deleted that because that's all required by 53G-10-304 subsection 3. And then on the back side, lines 105 down to 114, got line 106 to 108. That is a direct copy and paste of code. Line 109 to and 110 was already the integrated model for the curriculum was already referenced on line 42 of the rule, so we took that out because it was redundant. Line 111 and 112 is in code. Line 113 was moved, I mentioned previously, and then line 116 to 128 are the sections of the rule that were impacted by the legislation. Without the reporting requirement in the commission, that section was no longer needed. We did check with staff to make sure that as we get rid of reporting requirements, that they are still, Robert Austin's still receiving the information he needs to provide a report we are still required to give to the Ed Interim Committee about the outcomes of civic education. That did not go away. And he said he was already receiving that information independent of these reporting requirements, and so he did not feel that the rule needed new reporting requirements added.
Good. Questions from the committee? Board Member Hanson?
So we pulled out the section that says they need to recite the pledge because it's in code. Does it say, did we refer? I can't find where we even referred to that section and said the Pledge of Allegiance shall be recited according to this section. We have some stuff in there that says it has to be a notice that we're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the parents, but I'd be more comfortable if we not just pulled it all out, because part of this civic education program is that we're going to have the pledge every day. I agree the details shouldn't all be here, but should we not refer to it and at least say, we are going to say the pledge in the morning according to section such and such?
Yes, we can add that just right after line 79.
Okay, I don't know what the best place is. I guess that would fit, wouldn't it? Because that's right before the parental notice of Pledge of Allegiance. Yeah, that's the next paragraph is.
What do you think in like subsection 4 or like not subsection but I 4 I B? Like there's 1, 2, 3 on something.
And please, those of you who worked on this, tell me if that doesn't make sense. I just think rather than deleting the whole thing, then we're just trusting the LEA to look through the code.
No, I agree.
Here we've got a rule that's on that topic, so just to refer to it, I think is.
Is this one that we can just direct you to add that and bring it back in August, or is there a rush?
You could probably just add it.
Or can you just add it? Okay, all right. Okay.
Okay. Final reading.
Yeah, Janet.
So I have a question. So I was reading about what this rule did, and I was reading about the elimination of the Commission on Civic and Character Education, and then I looked at the rule, HB 140, that's attached, and on lines 84 and 85, it says, each year the State Board shall report to the Education Interim Committee and the Commission on Civic and Character Education, the methods used, etc. So what's the status of the Commission on Civic?
It's gone. It's
A
gone.
separate bill deleted that. So House Bill 387 and House Bill 140 both passed. 140 got rid of the report to the Commission. 387 got rid of the Commission. So you have two bills that actually impacted this rule. So although that 140 does say the existing statutory language would say we would still need to report to the Commission, a separate bill then deleted that section of code altogether.
The money still is there. The money just went to different state agencies.
Where does the money go where to now?
And now go to the Heritage Arts.
Okay.
And that was discussed yesterday. It was one of the items that was pulled down from the consent calendar.
Okay, great. I understand. Thank you.
Good. Any other questions?
I just, I'm pretty disappointed. I think we've been teaching that we have a democracy and we do not. So I don't know what it means on line 65, a pure democracy. I don't know what that means. A democracy is a mob rule, and a mob could take away an individual's home, whereas a republic protects that individual. And so I don't know how that is taught. When the governor looks at the public or looks at the legislature and says, I can't understand why our students are being taught socialism, and they go into college and they want socialism, and now we have a high rate of people wanting to vote in socialism. This is where it starts. It's not just economics, but teaching the different types of government, and what's not being taught. And I don't think a republic is being taught. I don't think what real definition of a democracy is, and that our founders spoke adamantly against a democracy. So to me, it's just doing exactly the opposite of what the governor wants.
But it
which is
says
unfortunate.
they shall provide instruction on these forms.
Oh, they shall do a lot of things, but they're not.
Like, I'm just curious,
So-
how would you want it to?
Well,
it's like you don't believe it.
I don't believe it.
Okay, so it's not that it's
don't
written
believe it.
in a way
I
you
don't
like, you
believe
just
it
don't believe
because
it.
the results are showing different.
But you don't have a problem with how it's written.
I would totally rewrite it, but I'm not going to do that here. So I'm just making a statement. Is basically what I'm doing. I don't think this is adequate. I think it's very inadequate. So.
Do you have a motion?
Maybe this. I'm going to propose this. I propose a motion to add clarifying definitions of 64 lines 64 through 73, so that it's clear on what each form is, what each form of government is.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is to add,
just for a start,
clarifying definitions on line 64 to 73. Do you want to speak to your motion? I guess you kind of already have.
I think I already have.
Okay, any discussion to that motion? I would like to know, how does that work with rule writing? Is that
It can be done. One thing that I will state, Robert Austin, by the way, he apologized for not being here. Jennifer is here on his behalf. He's having his civics conference today with the teachers teaching. So the timing was not well for him to be with us. He did mention that this rule has informed the standards that are formed, and I am now speaking blindly, but I'm not entirely sure if the standards provides a definition for these already because they were in the rule and they're further expanded there, or if teachers are directed in the standards to provide that context through curriculum.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but that is
Well,
something
then,
to
do you
consider.
know more?
Not enough to be.
Then I would maybe direct staff. Then I would maybe direct staff and to possibly bring this back later at another time to update and to clarify what those definitions are in policy, so that we're absolutely clear.
Let me just
I think
are you
we're
amending
problems.
your motion?
I'm amending my motion.
So would you restate your new
So
motion?
my motion is to direct staff just to go through the standards and see if they are defined there in the standards, and if they are, to maybe put that into policy so that it's clear.
Gosh, yeah, I'm just trying to think, would that be necessarily a motion, or it's just like you just wanted to check to
I'm
see
just
if it's kind of just a
because
check
I don't
to see
think
if
it's
these are defined
adequate.
somewhere.
I'm thinking maybe we want to bring this back.
So,
the
you
next
know what?
meeting if it's
Can we
not time
just-
critical.
Yeah, it's not time critical, is it? And that way we can add
So I'd like to
what
see how we handle
Hanson
that
said. You can
section
check on
of,
if these things are defined in standards. Okay.
Good.
So, Janet?
That was, we don't need to vote, right?
No, we don't.
I just had one other question. So I noticed in here where it talked about every school has to have "In God We Trust" somewhere.
Yes.
And that was crossed out.
Because it's in the statute.
That is in statute as well.
So, but is it still in here under some place under the code that schools still have to do that?
So we can.
Oh, we
also
don't have
reference-
to do that
It's in
anymore.
code.
It's in code.
It is
yes.
in code. Sorry, I apologize.
It's in law.
Oh, okay.
You are required to ensure that all the patrons, so on line 4849, you are, as an LEA, required to ensure that all patriotic, civic, and character education is compliant with the following sections of code.
Yeah, I like that.
And that section of code is already cited there. So 302 is where the "In God We Trust" motto section is. So.
Okay. Well, then we will hold off on this one. Thank you for doing that. And then we are moving on to 6.7, which is just an information item on the early childhood standards. Let's go ahead and invite our friends to the table. And Gosh, Jeff, you're leaving us for a second?
know.
Actually, for the rest.
Off the hook for a minute.
I want to hear it all.
Okay, will you guys introduce yourselves and then talk to us about the information?
I'm Jamie Robinson.
I was going to introduce them because they're
So sorry.
I was going to say, we have some new faces.
I was going to say, why don't you introduce yourself?
Jennifer Bronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. I'll have you introduce yourselves, but this I think is their first time. You've been before.
I've been in this room on the side.
Okay. They are newbies to the table, so train them well. But I'll let them introduce themselves. They've been with us for a while, but haven't had the opportunity to come speak with you at the committee.
So everyone be on your best behavior.
If you want different things from them, this is the time to train them.
Okay.
My name is Jamie Robinson. I'm in Teaching and Learning. I'm a preschool through second grade specialist.
Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you.
Jessica Smith, Teaching and Learning Preschool Specialist.
Thank you. Who's going to talk to us about early childhood standards update?
I will.
Were you lucky? Okay.
So, as I stated, I am Jamie Robinson with Teaching and Learning, and I wanted to provide you with an update of the early childhood standards, or the revision process. And so, I just wanted to see if you had any questions for me.
Would you be willing to give us some background on where we
Yes.
are in the process? Thank you.
Yes. So, we currently are in the writing committee process. It took a little bit of time just because of transitions of new people and stuff. So, we are in the writing committee process. We have worked on a vertical alignment for English language arts and math and fine arts. As health got approved, we tried a vertical alignment with health. We're in the process, since science was approved yesterday after the 90-day review. I had a draft form of that ready to go. And so the early childhood standards cover all content areas, which is why it has been a longer process than we first anticipated. And we didn't want to put out a document that was going to be out of date by the time it got put out. So we knew all the other revisions were happening.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Committee members, do you have questions?
Yes.
Board member comments?
I look at 3 and 4-year-olds and I'm thinking, this is too much for them. Is it all academic or is there any room for play? I mean, I'm concerned with lack of play now. And we're academic heavy and to me, I'm seeing this and I'm thinking, preschool needs to know how to do kindergarten stuff and kindergartners now need to know how to do first grade stuff. And all of a sudden we've moved everything down chronologically, but psychologically it could be not good for them overall in the long run as the development goes. So help me out.
My goal, and I should say, but the committee's goal has been to embed instruction through play.
Okay.
It is not just at the table, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to give you information. It is while the kids are in play that we're taking the opportunity to have them count while they're playing or to talk to them about different items as they're interested.
Okay, so if I may follow up. So as they are interested, so are you allowing them to freely explore and discover on their own, or is this more directed to what the teacher wants them to learn and discover?
Are you okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. I forgot.
Okay.
So it's really a program decision. It depends on how the program is running, but a lot of them have a mix. So part of the day is student choice, and some of the day is teacher-directed activities.
Nice. Okay. I think Board Member Cannon had a question.
Yeah, I'll give you the easy one first. I know what KEEP is. What's DOT?
It is the developmental observation tool.
Oh, that's right.
Developmental observation.
I like the head nod. That was good.
Definitely.
More new.
I thought it was Dorothy.
And then, so I'm wondering about the ages and the scope of children that these standards are going to reach.
Yes. So, are you okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm trying to remember.
And I am too. Okay, so thank you for helping me.
I'm trying to remember my process, okay? So, Board Member Cannon, the direction that we're looking at is the standards are going to hit specifically 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, but the assessments that we're looking at are specifically written to only target the 4-year-old population. Okay. And they are just based on...
So what kids are getting this, and what kids in Utah are getting this early childhood
So we partner, like the standards are available for anyone, but our private providers, Head Start, other public preschools or special ed preschools utilize the standards in their practice to prepare students for kindergarten readiness.
Okay.
But
So
it's
this
voluntary.
is
Absolutely.
and so this isn't necessarily people from the state that are providing this. These are private providers, or
If you get a chance, go visit Granite's. Granite has lots of preschools.
Did you want to respond to that?
I've been to at least one of those.
And they're really fun. Take a visit. I took one today.
But I'm just wondering, so they're calling on you for standards?
So this actually, historically, they weren't here when this all happened. So we redid the standards in 2013. We've had them for 20-ish years now, so that they're not new to the state office. In 2013, they were revised, but we've had 8 or 9 content areas be revised since, and we also saw that we had some oversights in the initial revision of the standards in 2013, such as like we never actually asked people to make sure kids knew their numbers from 0 to 10, which is really a predictor skill. So there was some alterations in what we know, like when they are counting, that they can attach like, oh, that's a 2, it's 2 things, that kind of thing, to the number. And so little bits of that have kind of worked in, but a lot of it's just due to the having so many content standards as we're back. So the board actually, we came to the board 2.5 years ago, maybe 2 years, somewhere in that space, to ask for the approval to revise the standards. We were given the approval to revise, but in that time, I think I've had 5 staff members in this job, so we've had a little delay in practice, and then the standards changing on us between arts, health, PE, science, have just continued the delays along the way. So we would love to get these done in the next few months so that we can do all of the public review.
Before we do something else.
Yeah, right.
I just want to say, I believe the original need was because federally we're required to provide special ed preschool, and those IEP services have to be tied to a standard. So there was a need for early childhood standard, as well as we're beginning to build the regular ed preschool space with the preschool grants that are available. And an element of the high quality classrooms is that they teach to the standards.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or any other information you want to give us? Well, thanks you guys. Thanks so much. I'm excited.
We shall see you in a couple of months.
We're starting them on the every other month.
Thank you. Jennifer, don't you go anymore.
I forget.
You guys, our last action item, and I'm kind of so excited about this because we've watched the progression, and you remember last time I asked Jennifer to actually have some application, some real numbers put into the rubric. So I'll let Jennifer talk to us about that and kind of guide us through.
Absolutely. So just to refresh you from last month, because it probably feels like years ago.
It really does.
So last month we did the cycle and the checklist, and the part that we kind of stopped and said, we need a little bit more work on this was the rubric to make sure it was going to articulate our needs and those pieces. So what I did is I took it back and asked a few staff members that are up closest to that timeline, due to it being close to 7 years for revision, to have them fill out the rubric to see, is there that threshold? How do we kind of make decisions around what is the point value we might consider our review, again with the checklist being that second component. So you have social studies, world language, and ELA as just samples. Knowing that social studies is queued up for next year to start revision, ELA is in 2 years, and world language is in 3. And you'll see the values reduce greatly over that kind of time period, which I think helps to validate that the tool is doing its job in terms of identifying when a standard is ready for revision. I did do a weighted score, so the first category, academic factors, has more value than the other 2 categories in terms of just staff really felt like that's when we do standards, that's the meat of the work, but the other 2 have value as well. So you have a couple different documents in your board docs. So the first 3 are just the samples of the content areas. The weighted scores, if you pull up that kind of little Excel piece, maybe it might connect, but there's a little table that basically you can plug and chug the values into to get a weighted score. And so thinking about what should that score be. When I did social studies is the highest score, and they are queued next year for a review. So it actually kind of seems to be working.
And ELA is second.
ELA is second, and they are very close to social studies. And the only reason I would say we have to be cautious about queuing a review there is that if you do social studies and ELA the same year,
it impacts elementary teachers dually, and that's a big lift.
And it's big for the district.
Yeah.
And it's elementary
So we
social
would like to
studies,
delay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
I
elementary
remember
social
doing-
studies.
Not too long ago.
You can imagine social studies would get overshadowed by ELA if we were to do them the same year. So we would like to do the plan, although you'll notice the scores are relatively similar. They're only a few points of each other. And so at the bottom of the spreadsheet is the actual kind of calculation, how I did it. So you can just kind of see what the point values are. But for social studies, it's a 44.8 is kind of how the score comes out. And so out of 100. But it seems like 40 seemed to be the kind of threshold because ELA was 41. So really ELA could be cued by this, depending on how you guys decide what a threshold means, but you would need that other item on the checklist to cue it early. And I don't think we have anything on the checklist at this time. We have teachers, I would say, saying it's a time, but...
Jeff, okay, so I was looking, sorry to interrupt if I may, Chair. I just take over. Wasn't it the Student Advisory Council asking for the ELA standards to be looked at sooner?
And social studies.
And social studies? Okay.
So that would be a good checklist item, yeah.
Yeah, so that would be added. And also I think, other teachers have been asking for ELA as well. And I've been asking for ELA for about 6 years now. And
that could go into the checklist public feedback.
Yeah, and I
was
was
making sure it was in.
I think from using all this data, yes, ELA should, but my concern is social studies. So if you want to delay social studies for ELA, that could transfer. But I think
Social
doing them
studies
both
has
at
a
the same
higher score.
times, we have difficulty.
Like I think that's where this
the field.
rubric can be effective is because you can say
Social
really,
studies is queuing higher.
It's queuing higher, and they're both, but we can't do them together. But
They're
we are
coming.
ready to go.
They're both coming,
Yeah.
and I think this gives you, hopefully you feel confident in the process that
Yeah.
this does say ELA is ready, but given that we need social studies and they're both elementary areas, that's a lot of lift for an elementary teacher as well as the LEAs, and maybe we want others to speak to that than myself, but the LEAs would be severely impacted if we did both.
And you had 3 different groups fill these
Yeah,
problems.
so if you
and
look
how
at-
did they feel about it?
They found it useful, kind of thoughtful process, and we had gone through as a whole staff looking at the rubric, revising it, updating it. And so them actually going through the process, they didn't have to come and ask questions. It was
Okay, that's
clear,
better.
which was great because it was always open to feedback and how we can change it, but it was clear in their interpretation as well. But you'll notice world language is super low in comparison, but they're 3 years out from the timeline because they did it about 3-4 years ago. So it does seem to be working, which was a nice validation, which went back to
I'm so
your
glad
point.
you-
But I think this was a good exercise to make sure it is giving us the kind of information we want. Honestly, the threshold of 40 might be the place that we put it, knowing that ELA and social studies both really are up for review.
Yeah.
And just it would be that kind of trigger point at this point, given the data we have.
One of the triggers,
Yeah. Yep.
Any other
Are we supposed
questions?
to take
or-
action on these?
Well, it says action, and I think we're looking for maybe a threshold.
Yeah.
I think that's
just
the
like,
action we're
one,
looking
are we
for.
going to use the rubric as is, and then 2.
Wait, did you say when?
Or are we?
Are we going to? Okay, 1 is, are we going to use it?
Is this what you want?
Yeah,
And then 2, is there a threshold you want to set, or do we bring it? Do I bring them annually, or every couple of years do you, and then we weigh in on each one?
So what determines the percentage points?
The weighting?
The weighting.
The weighting. So if you look on kind of the side of the tables in any of the contents, whichever one you want to open, I'm going to open social studies just so that I have one to look at. On the very kind of right side, there's a bunch of numbers.
Yeah.
So the weighting is there in terms of if they answered a 3, it's 100 points, and kind of basically having to break it down into thirds. And then the further column, there's an actual 70%, 15%, 15%. So we put the most weighting, and this is obviously up for discussion, on the academic factors, and then you definitely still have some weighting on the feedback from the field and the lack of clarity, which will come out in other checklist items, hence why they're a little bit lower, because the survey would also bring that information out, as well as things like the Student Advisory Council. That's another piece that would come as another layer of the puzzle. So it's low here because it's otherwise you're getting hit in the same component multiple times across the opportunity.
Any other questions? What do you guys think about this? Do you like it? Janet?
I just think, well, I looked through it and I thought, I kind of like this. I think this is well done. I'm wondering, how would it align with your 7-year cycle page that you had put out for us.
So what I was
align
anticipating in terms of how it works is honestly just having the staff in a staff meeting each year or every other year, depending on what you guys think, do the exercise of filling it out. It didn't take staff very long to do it because they're very aware of their current state of standards. So we honestly could do it and have those results and then be able to use that as the queuing mechanism. That way you're not, that is just a practice that we do in the agency, that annually we do this revision checklist for every content year.
And it would keep those questions fresh in your mind. And we talked about like in standards creation, like it's just you're always aware of what needs to be.
Well, and we thought about in standards creation, bringing this in as part of it, along with Portrait of a Graduate and some of our other pieces, so they can think, are these standards going to put us at the lowest level of this scoring ratio when we produce them?
So we don't have to redo them again next
year.
Right.
Do they have rigor? Do they have some of the components we talk about in here? We want our writers to be thinking about these things so that we don't come and finish them and go, wow, we're already at a 20. So it will go into the revision process as well, not just the do we cue a revision, but also as we revise, kind of giving us some guidance around that too.
So if we were to review annually, we wouldn't really need to set a threshold, would we?
No, I mean, it would give us
kind
of a point, and if you want them brought to the board as
it might be good if there's a threshold that it hits, and whatever you guys decide, like the 0.40, I don't know if that's a good place. Like if they cross the threshold, maybe they come back here. I don't know.
Well, I'm thinking we look at them no matter what comes out, just to see. I mean,
just kind of reporting.
40 is kind of a stab in the dark right now.
Yeah, you're right.
I think it's working really well. This is kind of
it was a great
nice job.
Yes.
You guys' part to take a concept and turn it into something nice like this.
I was going to raise my hand, but
I couldn't see you. Yeah, Debbie, come on up.
Well, just as a best practice, and I think this is fantastic. Obviously, this kind of started in audit and it's so I think it's fantastic, right? This is great. So I think rather than just having it be a practice, I think it should be formalized. And so putting it into some kind of internal policy or procedure, wherever that is, whether it's an agency or whether it's specific to teaching and learning or in a desk manual or something, just so that it's formalized so that staff will know, every year I have to do this, and it can be held accountable for that. And then as part of that, I would say looking at the standards and revision with each of the factors, the academic, the community, defining what that is or what the staff looked at to come up with the percentage is important for consistency over time. So we know what we did this year to get the percentages, but when we go back next year, are we looking at the same thing? So has there been a substantive change to the field of study? Well, what did you look at to decide the answer to that is yes or no? And are you going to look at the same thing like next year? Yeah, so just kind of defining those elements. I mean, we did for point purposes, but establishing what did you look at to figure out what the points were, I think that's really important as well, so that it's consistent no matter who's doing it.
Right.
Would be really good to include in the policy.
People who did it this year, and it could add to perhaps. And I'm wondering about a date. Like, is there a certain date?
Anything that you need in there to formalize it so that it can happen, it's designed well, it can be implemented, and then people know when they're going to come back and report so that there's accountability for it. I would say that's the accountability framework, start to end, design, implement, and monitor. Just all of that put in a policy, and then when Jennifer moves to Hawaii, then the next person knows, like, this is what you do. I just would say that's a best practice. I would
$6
I moved to Alaska last time, so that tells you.
Okay. So we're kind of talking, and so I think, I mean, it sounds like unless somebody has a problem, I think we probably want to approve the rubric. We like it. And then we want to direct staff to work on a policy manual, etc. The things like the date, those kind of things that would be important for doing this a consistent way. Okay, so if somebody has a motion.
I thought that was a motion.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is to approve the standards revision and review rubric and direct staff to create a policy, manual, guidelines, dates, etc. And could you bring that back in August, or is that?
Yeah, no problem.
Discussion to the motion that I just made.
I like it.
I like it too. I feel so proud we've gone through this transition, and she's done such a great job.
And I want to send all this to NASB when to show NASB.
So you can be proud.
Yes, we've done a lot. So it's really had a lot of work around this space. I came in late to it all.
Yeah, but you took it and ran.
Lisa. So this all started with my inquiry to review the standards of math and ELA. So I'm kind of protective of this as far as still wanting that. And at some point, I would hope that in the standards and assessments that we draft policy or guidelines, maybe directing audit on what to look for as far as performance audit standards. We're looking at the standards, performance audit, what that looks like. I don't know if that has to do with audit. I don't know if that needs to stay in the audit. I don't know, what makes our standards good versus not good. I know AIR just did their own research report on the Common Core standards and the assessments and the achievements that students have had the last 9 years, and they've said this is an utter failure. Bill Gates, who funded this, utter failure. We have failed our kids through the Common Core standards. And
sorry to interrupt, but is this an amendment to the motion?
No, there's no amendment to the motion, but I'm just making a statement.
Okay, you're just making a statement.
And that and so what do good standards look like? I think that's part of the audit's job as far as performance auditing, to make sure that we are doing our job to the best of our ability. And if the audit committee can do that, audit department can do that, then that betters our role and what we do in providing standards
and
for the state.
I think the rubric in here really gets at the heart of it.
Well, that leads to a process of reviewing it, but when it comes to the review itself, what does that look like? What questions? We've submitted questions before, and I've forwarded them on to Jennifer, and we've talked about that before, and we talked about that. So if we can just keep that in mind, and maybe that's another policy, maybe that comes out, of standard that these are the questions that we ask, and look at to making sure that these are the best standards for Utah students, because I would hate to see another 10 years of experimentation on our kids and not showing that they could be better than they are. I think that's a waste of students' time and lifetimes.
Oh, that's just...
It is. It's a lifetime of education that should have been given or taken. So
Okay. Any other discussion of the motion? Okay, the motion before the committee is to approve the standards revision and review rubric and direct staff to create policy. Come back in August and show us. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Can I ask Patty something? I have a request.
Yes, Patty, she has a request.
I have a request, and you can tell me if it's possible or not. I've had a couple people, we had that presentation on the expanded core standards for the visually impaired, and then I've had a question also on the extended core standards, and we were talking, we don't know that much about them. We wonder if Kim Fraudo or Leah could come in and do a little presentation and show us what they are, who approves them, how they all come together, and all of that. So that
as they mentioned today, there's no state standards. Yeah, so it would be nice to be educated.
I can get with board leadership and put that request in, and as a study session item.
That would be nice.
I would love that.
Yeah, or even just come to our committee, whatever.
Oh yeah, just to our committee.
That would be.
That's
nice.
true. We could just so an information item.
Yeah.
Add an information.
Either way, whatever you want to do it.
So that'd be an information item here.
Yeah.
That would have this, and then in.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we'll add that as an information item.
Yep. Okay. You guys, thank you. I hope you get some sleep this weekend. I don't know if it's hitting you, but I feel like just hit a wall.
Yeah.
This is you guys for last.
Yes, we want to. I don't know what we want to do. Cry.
No, I'm sure you'll
wish
be
you well.
excited.
We're going to wish you well.
Well, you make us think always.
Yep.
We, of course, wish you well. We watch on Texas.
I hope your house works out.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've closed on the house, and my husband's already moved in.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
So is he remodeling
He's
for
already
you?
picked his side of the bed.
There's only one side. That's his side. He doesn't get to choose the other side. There is remodeling going on.